It's time to enable multiplayer. To do that, we just need to add in the Player Input Manager component and make a couple changes to our player prefab. Let's start by creating an empty game object. I'm going to do this in level 2 because it's the one that I have open. So I'll hit create empty. We'll call this Player Input Manager. And then we'll hit the add component button and find the Player Input Manager script. I'm going to right click on the transform to just reset it so the position's all zeroed out. It doesn't really matter, but it's a habit of mine. And then I'm going to look at the options down here. We have a couple things that we can choose from. First, there's a notification behavior. We're going to talk more about this in a little while when we start diving into the code and hooking into the code. And the same with that on the player, or the player input script. But we also have a joining section. There's a join behavior, which has join players when button is pressed, when an action is triggered, or manually. When button is pressed means that as soon as I press a button on a controller that's valid, it will try to add a player for that device or that controller, and that's what I want to happen. I hit any button and then my new player will come in. For the player prefab, I need to go assign the player, so I'm going to hit the little search box. Go find my player prefab and just assign it. Now there's an option here for joining enabled by default. I want that on, just allows my players to hop in automatically. And then an option to limit the number of players. For now, I'm just going to limit it to 2. We could have any number that we want, but I'm just going to set a limit to 2 because, that's how many controllers I have set up right now. I'm going to save my scene, press play, and let's watch our character jump into the game. So we should start with one character that's already there spawned. I should be able to run around, use my space bar and jump up and down, and then press the X button and have another character appear, and this character is now bound to completely separate controls. Notice that the camera's following him though, and it's no longer following the other character. It's because I've added a new one. It's going to follow the most recent character that's been added into the game. We haven't set up anything to deal with tracking multiple players yet, so it's just going to follow whatever's most recently added. Let's stop playing though and try out one other option. There's this enable split screen option that allows us to get a split screen view of both of our players. If I just check that box and press play again, we should get our game starting up, and I should be able to hit the X button or any button on here. Let's see. And get another view, but I don't get the actual split screen. And the reason for this, if we look down here at the errors, is that it says player has no camera associated with it. Let's click the error box so we get it in the console. Here it says the player has no camera associated with it. Cannot set up split screen. Point player input.camera to a camera for the player. So what it's telling us is if we go to this player, the camera here is not assigned. So we need to stop playing, and what needs to happen here for our split screen setup to work is that the camera needs to be a child or associated with the player. So we need to have some way to associate the camera with our player, and the easiest way to do that is to just take our main camera, drag it down to be a child of the player, then go to our player, hit overrides, and choose apply all. Now our camera will be a child of that player object, and we can assign it right here. So on the player input, we can take the camera and drag it in and assign it, then choose overrides and hit apply. Now, if you're wondering why the camera had to be a child of it to be assigned, the reason for that is kind of confusing if you're not familiar enough with prefabs, but as you get more and more familiar with them, it should start to make a lot of sense. This player object has references to things, but if it's going to be in a prefab, let's go select the prefab here. Go find the actual prefab, this player object. Let's go open it in prefab edit mode where it's no longer in level 2. If we didn't have the camera as a child here, we wouldn't be able to have it assigned in the prefab because the references inside of a prefab must be to things that are also inside of that prefab unless it's a placed instance of it in the scene. But for an actual saved off prefab to have that value there, it needs to be a child. So we have the main camera as a child. I'm going to go back and then we're going to press play one more time, hit the X button, and see what that does to our player, allowing them to come in. We've got split screen on and we hit the button, and like that we now have 2 players. Still one little issue though. Our character right now is the only one being followed. Both of the split screens are following the second player, the most recent one to join. And that's because of the way Cinemachine works. All of the virtual cameras are kind of, the top of virtual camera is what all of the main cameras are looking at. All of these brains, when we have multiple brains, they're going to look at the same virtual camera. And that's because we need to write some code to customize that and make that make it so that the virtual cameras know which brain to associate with. It's a little bit confusing and complicated. We're going to get into that a little bit later. For now, though, what we're going to do is just disable the Cinemachine brain, go to the virtual camera, and disable the virtual camera. We'll go to the player. We'll choose overrides and hit apply all. This is going to remove our nice little smoothing, but it's going to give us nice, easy split screen, and then we'll dive into the little bit of code fixes that we need to make it work. So here I can run around, and I can come in with a new character, and now my screens are mapping to specific players. The right one is my second player, the left one is my first player. I've got my inputs all mapping, and everything's just kind of working as expected. Of course, until I open up a new level and then go in here and there's no player input manager and everything breaks. But let's stop playing for now, go to plastic, and get our working version of level 2 checked in. So I'm going to save level 2, say that we added multiplayer support to level 2, and we'll check that in. And then let's go do the same thing in level 1 real quick before we wrap this part up. We'll go into our scenes, we'll go to level 1, and we're going to take the level 1 and drag it in here. Instead of double clicking on it, if you double clicked it, don't worry, just double click level 2 again. We're going to take level 1, drag it in so that they're now side by side and they're loaded on top of each other. This is actually a very interesting and helpful way to get things kind of copied across scenes. It's something that I do a lot, so it's something that you should probably know how to do. So I've got both of these scenes loaded now and expanded. I'm going to take Player Input Manager, duplicate it, Control D, drag it down here into player or level 1, remove that 1 at the end of it, and save with Control S. Now, if I go back into plastic, I've got both of my levels changed, and we'll just say that we added Player Input Manager to level 1. There's technically no change in level 2, but I'm just going to hit check in, and it's going to update and know that I didn't actually change anything. All right, there we go. We've got both of our levels in, and I think we're good to go.